You're listening to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence, and I've had the opportunity to interview many of those who are making a difference at the intersections of yoga and health. And I'm here to share with you their stories and conversations. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, I interviewed Dr. Jonathan Rosenthal. Jonathan's a neurologist and a yoga student of Sri Dharma Mittra. Since 2014, he's been passionately sharing neuroscience and yoga. He aspires to help others learn the actual science on yoga to enhance their practice, customize their instruction, and support their advocacy with scientific evidence. Jonathan's also the host of the Neuroscience and Yoga Conference, which is now in its 5th year and will be taking place coming up in April, the 23rd to the 27th, both in person in New Jersey, right outside of New York City, and online. And we're here so Jonathan can share more about himself as well as the upcoming conference. And it's really great to have connected with you, Jonathan, and to be speaking with you here today.
Likewise, Michelle. It's really great. It's an honor to be on your podcast. So thank you for inviting me. And I always love speaking with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, let's just start by having you share a little bit more about yourself. As I noted in your bio, you're a neurologist and also a yoga student. So tell us about this path and which one came first and how they've lined up together in your life.
Definitely. It's hard to say which one came first. They were very contemporaneous. They happened at the same time. So I first became interested in yoga as a teenager because I had an English teacher who luckily had us read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I got really interested in the idea of enlightenment and spiritual paths. And so I started reading a lot of Wikipedia rabbit holes about that and found yoga and really wanted to find a yoga teacher. However, I grew up in the suburbs of New York, and so I had this impression that if I went to a yoga class, it would all be women my mom's age. I wouldn't fit in there. I was like a 15-year-old boy, and I was like, I don't think this is really what I need to do. And then I was a runner. I hurt my ankle, and my friend was like, we should go try yoga. So I was like, all right, this is the opportunity to go. I went, it was a hot yoga class, and not only was everyone my mom's age, but they were all in bathing suits. And I was like, I'm not really sure that this is what I wanted. But then, I don't know, I did my first class and I actually really liked it. Something about the postures, holding them for a long time, the concentration during the practice, trying to not pass out because it was hot yoga. And so I kept going and I started to really connect with the teachers there. And I realized that, even though it seemed very fitness focused on the surface, when you actually spent time with the teachers, there was more behind it, the same kind of stuff that I read in Siddhartha and on Wikipedia. And after some time, one of the teachers told me, you should go visit this teacher in New York City. His name's Sri Dharma Mittra. And I remember I had a fight with my mom. I was like, I'm going to go into the city by myself and take this yoga class. And I don't know, I was 16 or 17 at the time. And she was like, no, you're not going into the city by yourself. But I convinced her and I went, and it was the most amazing class. And since that day, Dharma has been my teacher. I chose my undergraduate program to be close to Dharma. I chose my medical school so that I could be close to Dharma. I chose my residency so I could be close to Dharma. I chose my fellowship so I basically have really stayed connected to the Dharma yoga community. And so at the same time that I was interested in yoga, I was interested in the brain for many other reasons. I used to play the piano. I guess I still do, but not as much. And I found it interesting how I would learn piano, like how my brain could learn to play a piece, but also how it was so context dependent. So I could only play parts of music when they came after another part of music. If I tried to just play them from scratch, I couldn't do it. But it was only when I was playing up to that point, and then I could remember how to do it. And I just thought that was so interesting. So I got really interested in memory and neuroscience. And also my grandmother had a stroke when I was a kid, and she lost the ability to talk. So that really made me curious about how brains work. So that set me on this path of neuroscience. I studied neuroscience in undergrad. I mean, my neuroscience undergrad was like one of my favorite parts of my education. It was unbelievable to just spend all day, every day thinking about neuroscience. And then I chose to pursue neurology as a field. And so I take care of patients with brain, spine, and nerve disorders. And yeah, that's a little bit more about my path.
I love it. It's so great. And I know that folks are just listening and they're not looking at you right now and they may not know you, but you're a relatively young man. And I just am really inspired by you and this path that you're on. It's just really amazing to see. So, when did you get curious about the science behind the benefits of yoga, and how's that informed your work as a neurologist?
Yeah, great question. I actually always felt kind of like a pariah in both communities. In the science world, I felt like people thought of yoga as this hippy dippy thing, didn't really have any reason behind it, was really just a way that people almost like snake oil. I don't know where I got that. I mean, I think a lot of people feel this, but no one actually ever says that. But you just like, I don't know, you feel that way. And then in
Mm,
the yoga world, I would hear people say things like, oh, I would never go to a doctor. I don't trust doctors. Don't take medications. And so I just felt like I was an outcast in both. And then I started reading scientific papers about yoga. There's over 8,000 of them published. And I realized that there is a tremendous amount of interesting scientific knowledge on yoga, exponentially growing too,
yeah.
to the point now that yoga is in national guidelines for multiple diseases, including for cancer. Not saying that
Yep.
it cancer or anything, but it helps with quality of life, pain, mood, sleep, all of that during cancer. It's in the guidelines now for migraine, and I think the others are back pain and eating disorders. So it's like a
Yep.
huge thing. And so I started thinking like, wow, we need to get this out to more people so that in the yoga world, people can talk about the science, actually believe in science a little more because, people believe in things when it says the things they want it to say. And then also for doctors and nurses and everyone in the medical field to accept yoga a little bit more. And so I started hosting events about neuroscience and yoga, which evolved into this conference. And I'll never forget the moment that I was like, okay, this is not pariah stuff anymore. So my mentor in medicine, she has been my mentor since I was, I don't know, like 19 years old. And she is an ICU doctor. So she's very intense. She takes data and evidence very seriously. She was always very motivating for me. Like she would always like, you need to do this, make sure you're on top of this. Like she was very organized. So she's like someone I look up to as like the ideal of medicine, right? And I was so nervous to tell her about this conference. She would always ask me, what are you working on? Like, what projects do you have going on? And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say I've been working on this conference and we'll see how she reacts. I told her about it. She was like, that is so cool. You need to present this at national meetings. You need to like tell more neurologists about this. This is like really important. And I was like, okay, this is not pariah stuff. Like this is real. This is like evidence-based yoga. So that's kind of how this journey has unfolded for me. And I'm super excited to keep this conference going and to keep getting scientists and yoga teachers and students together to really share the science of how yoga affects the brain.
That's so awesome. And yoga therapist too. And I know that you're not a yoga therapist or a yoga teacher, but you're totally aware of the field of yoga therapy and what a yoga therapist is and the IAYT and all that, just based on our previous conversations. And I think it's just such goodness to know that you're there doing what you're doing and intersecting the fields in the way that you are. So let's talk a little bit more about the conference. So you've already kind of talked about how it started, the inception of it, which is wonderful. It's in the fifth year, as I've mentioned before. So what are your intentions and goals right now for it? And who is the conference for?
Yeah. So the conference is mainly for yoga teachers, students, and therapists. And I would say that's about 80% of the audience. And the goal is to equip those individuals with the scientific knowledge so that they can improve how they practice, teach, and advocate for yoga. And I think the advocacy part is one of the most important. If you have this knowledge, it's so much more effective to go to a hospital, a prison, a school with those data in hand and say, I want to teach yoga at your organization. Here's the evidence why. And that advocacy is just incredibly powerful. So
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to equip yoga teachers and students and therapists to go out and actually make changes. And so that's really the main goal. And then the other 20% of the audience is usually scientists, actually. So either researchers or clinicians who are curious about yoga. And so it's also another goal of the conference is to really help them include yoga in what they're doing with patients.
That's great. That's really great. So needed. So tell us about the specific event this year, end of April, 23rd to 27th, I think are the dates. And I know each year you have some key focus areas. So maybe speak to the key focus areas for this year's conference and who the presenters are. Of course, we're going to include links in the show notes and all that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to be able to remember every of the 30 or each of the 30 presenters right now, but the topics are yoga and brain injury and concussion, yoga and endocrine health, and yoga and reproductive health.
Fertility.
Fertility, but also pregnancy outcomes, PCOS, endometriosis, and menopause.
Great.
Yeah. I'll go into each of those a little bit more, but the way the conference is structured is the first day is an introductory day. And this is so everyone's on the same page. You don't have to come to the conference with any prior knowledge. So there will be an introduction to neuroscience talk, an introduction to science and research talk, an introduction to yoga talk, so that everyone's, some people come and they don't even really know what yoga is.
Yeah. They think it's something that it's less than, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then there's also an introduction to yoga therapy talk on that day. So first day, introduction to get everyone on the same ground level of what are we really covering and what's our baseline knowledge. And then each of the following days is a particular topic where there will be presentations by researchers, yoga classes with teachers who specialize in that topic. Many of the teachers are also yoga therapists. And then question and answer sessions with the researchers and yoga teachers. These are my favorite sessions, the question and answer sessions. It's like having the researchers and the yoga teachers talk and answer questions together is amazing. They really feed off each other and create a lot of insight. And then there are also discussion groups where we'll form small breakouts and practice applying the knowledge. So
Hmm.
that's a structure. That's like the structure of each day. And so each of those days will have one of the topics: brain injury and concussion, endocrine health, and reproductive health.
It's so great. I really look forward to it. So you can attend in person and also online. So how does that kind of break out? Like, is it just simultaneously live streamed or are there some in-person only aspects of it?
Great question. So this is the first year. Last year we did a bit of in person. This is the first year it really became in person, and that's because the conference started in this form during COVID. So there
Yeah.
was no in person at first. And so the options for signing up, we really want this to be available to everyone. So there is a free pass for anyone who wants to attend online. And that gives people all the presentations and the option to like engage in our Facebook community and really discuss what they're learning. And then there's an upgraded online pass that includes things like continuing education credits, workbooks, quizzes, many of the discussion groups and question and answer sessions, basically turning it into like a deep learning experience so that people can walk away and then also come back to it and keep learning from what happened during the conference.
Great.
And then the in-person is really for people who want that face-to-face human connection and really engaging. Like, sometimes you do it online and you're still working during it. You still have to do all your house chores and you kind of get pulled away from the learning experience. In-person is designed to be like you're fully engaged in it for 5 days. And
Hmm.
so the extra benefits of the in-person conference are we'll have this like super serene environment in Jersey City in this beautiful yoga center in a residential area. So we'll have city amenities, but kind of like be a little secluded so we can really focus. And then we have meals provided, so you don't have to worry about food. The meals will also be with the researchers and yoga teachers who are coming in person. We have about two people per day coming in person. And we will also have more community building events like kirtans and walking tours and things like that. So,
Sounds great.
yeah. And for people who are worried about attending in person from out of state, so for transportation, for people who are in state, we're right off the PATH train, so very accessible. And then for people who are coming from out of state, we've reserved Airbnbs nearby, and so we have accommodations for anyone who needs it.
That's awesome. Really awesome. Kudos to you because that's a ton of work.
Yes.
And I know this is like your side hustle. So it's probably not, side hustle is probably not the right term, but I just am impressed that you're doing all this alongside your work as a neurologist. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, it really makes me understand the term passion project.
Yeah, that's great. Passion project. Totally. Well, let's talk a little bit about scope of practice for the yoga therapist and how they can work best alongside medical professionals. We don't have to get into the nitty gritty of like what is the scope of practice of a yoga therapist, but I bring this up because I know our listeners are largely yoga therapists here for this podcast. And you've already alluded to it a bit in terms of having the evidence for advocacy. And I think that that is a key part of how yoga therapists can align really well with medical professionals. But maybe you could just speak a little bit more to that, like how you see yoga therapists embedding in the medical profession more.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are some hospitals where there are in-house yoga therapists,
Yeah.
and they provide services like they're salaried, and then they have like a schedule that's available for people to sign up, and they have like a full patient panel. They take on maybe, I actually don't know the number, but let's say it's like 20 to 50 patients at a time, and they're teaching them yogic techniques to help them with their illness.
Yeah.
And
And they're part of a collaborative care team usually.
exactly. And so they also attend meetings with the physicians, the nurses, the physical therapists, other people involved in the patient's care to discuss that patient's care. And I think that that is an awesome model. I don't know if it's feasible everywhere, and not every yoga therapist is going to be able to practice that way because it takes an enormous amount of resources. I mean, the hospitals that I know that do that have received generous funding from private donors to do that. I'm sure there
Hmm.
are other models of how it works, but those are just the ones I know of. And
Hmm.
so I think a lot of times for a yoga therapist, they're going to meet exclusively with the patient, not necessarily the whole care team. And they're going to get their information about diagnosis and treatment plan from the patient.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think a huge part of the scope of practice for a yoga therapist is being able to take that information and knowing what it really means. Like, what does this diagnosis really mean? And how are these treatments going to affect this patient? So, for example, being on chemotherapy might really affect the nerve function of that patient. So, it's very common to get neuropathy from chemotherapy. And how does that affect balancing postures and the practice? Yeah, so there's so many little things like that. Like with this disease, what can I expect? And I think it makes sense for why yoga therapists often specialize in particular
Hmm.
populations because
Yeah.
there's a lot of specific knowledge for each of those populations.
Right. And what about on the flip side, like with the doctors? How can we help them learn more about yoga and yoga therapy and why it's important and sits alongside what they do? I know the work that you're doing right now is a huge move in that direction. And
Yeah.
so there's more of that, I would say, right?
Yeah. So the doctor yoga therapist communication is easiest when yoga therapists are in the system and there's like a shared medical record system that they can communicate through. Because if a yoga therapist puts in a note, then the doctor can read that, and then the yoga therapist can also read the doctor's notes. And then for one-on-one meetings, like chat features and stuff like that. But outside of that, it's much more difficult with patient privacy laws because I think the first thing would be making sure that both parties are who they say they are and that they should have access to patient information. And I don't know how that's done outside of, I've never had a yoga therapist reach out to me or ask anything. It's always been through the patient that we communicate. So I'm actually very interested in how you take care of that. Like, how do you address that problem?
Well, if the patient is willing to say, yes, you can talk to my doctor, then there's a release of
Yeah,
information that
that's
enables that to happen. So it's part of the relationship that you're establishing with your patient, with your client as a yoga therapist to say, hey, you're seeing X, Y, and Z in addition to me, the yoga therapist, these other providers. And let's look at the whole bit of your care. And in order to do that most effectively, it would be great for me to, share notes with those providers. So that's kind of how it comes about. And of course, there is a release of information needed from the patient.
Yeah. When you communicate with the physicians, are you doing it through the same app that they use, or do you like just send them faxes or?
It's all over the place. Yeah,
Okay.
there's not one way to do it.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of scope of practice, I think, applying yoga for patients is a very unique treatment modality. A lot of it is education, it's really like an education-based treatment, and it's showing people techniques that they practice on their own, teaching them yogic philosophy and mindset, and then yeah, like following up and making sure that they are tolerating the treatment plan and complying. And if they're not improving, making adjustments.
That's right. Well, I'm just so thrilled that you're obviously in the know and so collaborative and are advocating in all the ways that you are. I think it's just such good news for the field of yoga therapy and, of course, for people who are receiving care too, because it just expands the ability for people to improve. And yoga is just such a beautiful model for whole person health that it can sit alongside many different modalities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think adding yoga is one of the lowest risk interventions that we see,
Totally.
especially when there's documented evidence of benefit. Like I think it's a very reasonable add-on.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. Really appreciate that. So let's just kind of shift gears as we closed and kind of go back to you a little bit and just kind of getting from you what your yoga practice is all about. I always ask this question at the end of the podcast because we put such an emphasis on it when we train yoga therapists that you need to be in your own practice first in order to help others. And so I imagine being such a dedicated student of yoga for as many years as you have now, that you have a regular practice. Can you share with us what that looks like?
Yes, definitely. I am not like a intense asana 4 a.m. 108 sun salutation person.
Oh, good. I'm so glad and relieved.
So when I first started practicing yoga, I would do it every night. I would do postures and breathing every night before I went to bed. And it had a very big, I call it like a permanent effect on me. Like I don't do
Mm.
the practice as consistently as I used to, but that really had a permanent effect on me when I did do it. And then I got so busy in medical school and residency, it was just impossible for me to keep up. But what I did commit to is I go to see Dharma once a week and I do class with him once a week. And when I've asked him, my schedule is so busy, like what can I do to keep my practice? He said many different things to me over the years, but one of the most helpful was when you're walking in the street, and I think this really only applies for people who walk in the street. I don't think you can do this while driving, but he would say, put your hand in Jnana Mudra, rest it at your side, and keep your eyes low. Don't look up, don't look at everyone's face, don't distract yourself, but just keep your eyes low and just concentrate on walking where you're going. And of course, you have to have some awareness. Don't get into any accidents. Don't let a car hit you. But just that, controlling my attention anytime I'm walking, it's like my main practice now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just so cool. Say more. Looks like you want
Yeah.
to say some more.
So that was how I practiced for a really long time. And now that I'm an attending and I have more flexibility with my schedule and just a better life, honestly, I do go to Dharma twice a week. I do pretty difficult asana classes because I love them and I think they're very fun. And I also teach a beginner class on Saturdays. And so that's really what my practice looks like. Thursday, Saturdays, I'm doing asanas. I also do meditation and breathing with Dharma on Thursdays. And I, at home, do asana, I would say on my own 2 to 3 times a week now. And I always do breathing and meditation with my asana practice. And at night, I love to do deep relaxation in bed.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of flexible. There's no rules for my yoga.
Uh-huh.
I just use those techniques and I do them when I want to and when I can.
I love it. So I actually want to go back to this thing that you said about you were permanently changed. Like when you said that, of course, there's like no scientific evidence right now about that, but I'm sure it's got you curious about scientific evidence. But when you said that, I believed it on my own level, right? Based on my own experience with yoga and how I have been permanently changed by it. So tell me where your mind goes when you wonder about that permanent change based
Yeah.
on the brain and what you know or other systems.
Yeah. So the first thing that I think of is it would be wonderful if many of the studies, randomized control trials that have been done on yoga had long-term follow-up. They look 5 years later, do the effects persist? And that is not the case. It hasn't really been done. There are studies where they will do, let's say, and I'm kind of putting some studies together here. I don't actually remember the numbers right now, so please don't quote me on numbers. But let's say they do 12 weeks of yoga, they stop the yoga intervention, and then look 12 weeks later, did the effects persist? And that, yes.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
So that is kind of like the first inkling, like, okay, our personal experience of this is generalizable, right? It applies to more than just us. And then when you think about why, there are really good studies looking at changes in brain structure in response to yoga. And so when we think about like what yoga does to the brain, everyone loves the word neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
Neuro obviously refers to brain. Plastic just means changes. That's why plastic bottles are called plastic, because you can like mold them into any shape you want, or like plastic surgery is called plastic surgery because you can change how the skin is. And so neuroplasticity is just changes in the brain, and that could be molecular. You could just have molecules that are changing. Those are very short term. Or you could have really long-term changes, like having new cells produced, new synapses, increases in density between connections. And those kinds of changes are able to be detected on MRIs by looking at the size of brain regions. And so there are very strong studies looking at changes in the density and size of brain regions that have to do with self-regulation and memory, as well as decreases in the size of brain regions that have to do with fear and stress response. And
Hmm.
so it makes sense that if we see these very big long-term changes in brain structure and presumably function, that those could be permanent changes.
Yeah. So great. Well, thank you for all of your conversation today, Jonathan. Good luck with the conference. I'm really curious to stay in touch with you about it and collaborate in the future if that comes about and just kind of get the word out in general about what you're doing. So it's been delightful to speak with you today.
Likewise, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation and I admire all the work you're doing for yoga therapy. So it's an honor for me to speak with you, and I definitely look forward to future collaborations.
If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit us at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.